Hey, we're back on The Reckoning. You're in here with Ryan Haidt. And for the next segment, you're not just stuck with me. We have a great guest on the line. I'm excited to get to a voice that ought to be familiar to a few of you by now if you've been listening with us for some time. Mr. Alex Newman is on with us now, journalist, an author, an educator, and he is the president of Liberty Sentinel Media, also the senior editor over at the New American Magazine, does a lot of correspondence for them, trotting around the globe. But where he is trotting to this coming month is up here to Missouri. He's got a little bit of a swing through Missouri with at least a stop or two, one of them here in St. Louis, Wednesday, March 19, Liberty Link Missouri PAC, a great name you all are familiar with, Miss Bev Aylen. They are hosting him here in West County, St. Louis, so I wanted to make sure we get him on, see what they're doing, see what this tour is about, and make sure we get that on y'all's calendars. Alex, how are you? Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ryan. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And oh boy, I've got a few things I'd like to hear from, especially in the light of the last week full of news where Zelensky is the number one thing in all of my feeds. I'd love to get your take on a couple of things. But before we do that, let me get this from you. I want to make sure we put this on. I've mentioned this event here in St. Louis, but you're making a swing not just through St. Louis, but is there another stop or two in Missouri? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, as I understand, I've got a couple of private events with some leaders, and then I have an event in Cape Girardeau, I think it's pronounced.
Yeah, Cape Girardeau. It's Missouri. We butcher French things. I'm sorry, but you're right, Girardeau.
Fantastic. And I'll be there March 18th. It's going to be at one of the local churches. Really looking forward to it. And then, yes, I'll be at the Pillar Foundation, I believe, March 19th.
Right. Wednesday, March 19, 6:30 p.m. That's the Pillar Foundation down in West County. It's there at the intersections of Clarkson and Clayton Roads. This is, I always look forward when you come in because it's just, you are in the thick of a lot of these fights, often traveling to some of the conferences across the world in Europe and other places, Eastern Europe. And it's just great because this is something that we all understand. United Nations bad, World Economic Forum bad, but the reality of what specifically is happening, it's just like this little world that spins on and on and on. And we all get a little glimpse into it every once in a while, but there's so much stuff happening really beyond our view as just everyday Americans working, providing for our families. We need to know about it, though, because if we're just to pipe up to our own representatives, even to our own state officials and ask them to pressure the government to move this way or that at the federal level, this is stuff we need to know about. What are you going to be focusing on at these big public events, particularly here in St. Louis for us?
Well, thank you, Ryan, and I agree with you. This information is crucial, and that's exactly why the fake media is not talking about it. They've realized that even when they put their propaganda spin on it, even when they tell you that the sky is falling if you won't give up your money and your freedom and your family and all the rest of it, Americans aren't they're not buying it anymore. So now the policy is just keep them distracted, get them focused on other things, don't let them know what's going on. So I'll be shining the light on some of what's going on at the international level with the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the climate scam, and how Donald Trump is resisting all of that. Also, maybe most importantly, is what the self-styled global authorities are doing to our children in public schools, not just in the United States, but all over the world. So I'll be shining a light on all that. And, you're right, Ryan. You can't get this information from the news media. Yes, occasionally they'll send people to these conferences, but they're basically regurgitating press releases. I call it the cheerleading section. There are almost no real journalists who attend these meetings with a skeptical eye, with real questions. And so it's just essential that people get informed on this stuff. Literally the future of our country, our freedoms, our family, our communities, all on the line.
Absolutely astounding what happens as we plug in here and there. But here, let me ask you this. So when it comes down to it, I know that we've talked often about the World Economic Forum, United Nations, the different threats as we see them come in. I'm kind of curious, as far as your report card when it comes to the incoming, not the incoming, excuse me, the barely here, 41 days in, I think we are. It feels like 41 years of winning. I'm getting confused, though. 41 days into the Trump administration. What scorecard would you give them when it comes to some of the foreign entanglements, the globalist entanglements? I know we've all been paying attention to what DOGE is doing, running through some of the domestic stuff, what Congress is talking about with tax and spend policy. But when it comes to foreign stuff, I know we got a big glimpse into it with USAID and the scandal that broke there. But how would you rate the Trump administration these 40-plus days in when it comes to the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and moving us to a place of better American sovereignty first policies and procedures?
I'd give them a 10 out of 10. I'd give them an 11 if I could, because what they are doing on the international front is astounding. They're moving with speed. They're moving with precision. Just on the very first day in office, Donald Trump signed the executive order on putting America first in international environmental agreements, and didn't just get us out of the Paris Agreement effective immediately, also got us out of every single agreement and pact, whatever they call it, negotiated under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, negotiated over the last 29 years, cut off the funding for all of this. We see now really a restructuring of the U.S. government's relationship with the world. We're not going to be the policeman of the world anymore. We're not going to be the piggy bank for the world. We're broke. We can't keep doing it, even if we wanted to keep doing it, which we shouldn't. So he really has done a masterful job exposing some of this, stopping it. Obviously, there's a long way to go. There's still a lot of work left to be done. You can't get us out of generations worth of giant mistakes in 41 days, but we're making very rapid progress. Americans ought to be celebrating, and we should be encouraging our members of Congress to help make some of these changes permanent so that the next deep state Democrat puppet that ends up in the White House doesn't just try to reverse it all with a pen.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We see Trump comes in, Biden comes in, Trump comes in. What happens? U.S. Mexico City policy, it's gone. Now it's back. Then it's gone. And then the same thing. We're in the Paris agreements. We're out of the Paris agreements. And I know most of us, the constitutional conservatives, the pro-sovereignty folks, were saying, don't just get me out of the Paris climate agreement. Pull us out of the UNFCCC. Get rid of the Framework Convention on Climate Change altogether. You know what? How about we pull out of the United Nations? But these have always been, it seems, pipe dreams, it felt like. Even during Trump 1.0, it was good, but that still seemed like this, pipe dream that, Eagle Forum has and Phyllis Schlafly Eagles has and the John Birch Society has, but no one else is really talking about it because the reality is just not there. And now, under Trump 47, Katie bar the door. They're just doing all kinds of stuff. Now, remind me, did he need congressional approval to completely remove us from the UNFCCC?
Unfortunately, that is everybody's understanding right now. In fact, I've spoken several times with Trump's EPA Chief of Staff, Mandy Gunasekaran, who served during the first term and was the architect of getting us out of the Paris Agreement. And everybody's understanding right now is that because that was unfortunately ratified or allegedly ratified by the U.S. Senate, that is going to require some help from Congress.
Okay. And now, on a similar vein, but just a little half step over, what are your takes on NATO? And then this will just launch us into what you think about the last 4 or 5 days of what's happened. But when it comes to our relationship with NATO, I know that this is somewhat tied into the same thing. We talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about the UN, but the nuts and bolts reality is, I think Americans understand as a whole, we pay for an incredible amount of the NATO budget. Similar to, you look at all the chart breakdowns of the UN, who's paying for it? Well, a lot of people, but mostly us. Mostly the U.S., that's how it works. What have you seen let me ask it this way. Have you seen anything that indicates to you a sincere opportunity here from the Trump 47 administration to actually radically redefine our relationship with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Is that a possibility?
I do think it's a possibility. I think it's a very real possibility, and I think there's a strong desire in several quarters of the administration to actually get that done. Now, a couple of things I think that are important for Americans to understand, because there's still a lot of misinformation surrounding NATO. People think of it as like this guardian to keep us safe from communism. Nothing could be further from the truth. If they were really trying to keep us safe from communism, they'd be going to visit most of our universities, right? This is not a legitimate organization for keeping us safe from communism. What it is it's a military arm of the effort to create this new world order. We've seen this time and time again. In fact, if you read the NATO Charter, it is specifically organized under the Charter of the United Nations to be used at the whim of the United Nations. And we've seen that happen several times. The UN orders NATO to go do something. We saw it in Libya, right, where the UN Security Council authorized the military action in Libya. It produced an absolute disaster. So NATO is not keeping anybody safe from the Russians. NATO is not keeping anybody safe from communist China. We do need to maintain our national security in the face of these very real geopolitical opponents that our own government, that our own big businesses have been building up for decades. But NATO is not the way to do it. It's a disaster. It's going to produce more war. It's costing American taxpayers enormous amounts of money. And frankly, it should have been dissolved a long time ago.
That's interesting. I don't know if I'd actually looked at the at the connection between the UN and between NATO. I mean, I know, the U.S. I knew this. The UN Security Council could authorize actions that NATO might undertake, but that's an interesting connection to put to. I'm going to have to go into that. I hope everyone else does as well. Well, then let me ask you this, because I think a lot of us have been arguing, and this is what really broke the last few days. I know that, since Zelensky's visit to the White House on Friday, it sounds like another one is imminent because he's so sorry and coming back for peace, which I think seemed to be all on his, in his hands on Friday at the White House, and he chose to go a different route, whether that was spontaneous or if it was cooked up by a bunch of European leaders who goaded him into it. I guess we could leave that for speculation unless you know something I don't. But I want to say this
there were some Democrats in America who played a role
That's
in
right.
that. He
You're
had
right.
several meetings with foreign Democrats, and they egged him on to do this, and boy, do they look foolish now.
Oh, yeah, it backfired in beautiful fashion. And I got to say, it wasn't just Donald Trump. J.D. Vance is absolutely one of my favorite parts of the second Trump administration, because in him, I feel like I'm seeing a future of the Republican Party that I haven't seen in my lifetime. So I'm potentially excited about that. But
yeah, it was phenomenal to see him handle himself so well in that meeting, and that's what we need more of in our country. I hope we're going to see more of that over the next few years, and that really is the direction we should be moving. Enough of this squishy, rhino, spineless, whatever you say, fake media. We've got to have people with a backbone to stand up for us.
Right, and not only that, a politician with a backbone who understands the sovereignty, end of it, who understands domestic policy and moving us culturally in a Christian direction. But in my mind, someone who is inspiring young men to move toward those same goals. That is something I've looked for a long time. That shift in leadership, I think, is exciting too. But let me ask you this. When we're pulling apart NATO, I think that a lot of us for a long time have said this, that, hey, look, NATO may have had a noble goal at some point about, holding at bay the Soviet Union or something like that, basically our way to help protect Europe. We could argue that. But aside from that, the game has changed. The Soviet Union, the very thing that it was designed to face, no longer exists. And I'm not saying Russia is our buddy or Vladimir Putin is a good guy. I don't actually think either of those things are true. And yet, I can say it's time for us to re-examine how we're operating in Europe, because it is so very duplicitous for a lot of the left in America to just, anyone who says, hey, maybe we should do Ukraine differently. You just love Putin and you're a Putin apologist. And then on the other hand, all these Europeans who throw that around are buying all of their natural resources and energy from him. And it's like, wait a minute, guys. None of this makes sense. We need to stop and pick this apart. So if you had a 30-second view of the Ukraine-Russia situation, and in my mind, it's not an excuse that Russia is all our friend, but I look at China and say, oh my gosh, this is a much more important thing. What could an American conservative say back to someone to say, hold on, here's how we need to re-examine this, and not just try to get peddled in? I'm not sure if there's really an answer to that, though, because the left is going to just try to shove you in the corner no matter what.
Yeah, and that's because the left is not using facts or reason or evidence. They've got pre-planned talking points that are aimed at a pre-planned objective. The reality is, you're absolutely right. The Russian government is not our friend. Vladimir Putin is not our friend. He's actually a very dangerous individual. And one thing that's concerned me a little bit among the conservative movement is how some of us seem to be warming up to him. I don't think that's wise. But I think it's very important for people to understand, even if you believe the whole excuse that underpinned NATO is going to keep us safe from the Soviet Union and all the rest of it. What happened after the fall or alleged fall of the Iron Curtain? Well, we were warned about this by defectors for decades before it happened. None of the communists were punished. They rebranded. They renamed their political parties. They branded themselves as businessmen. They purchased state assets for pennies on the dollar, and they're still in charge in Bulgaria, in Romania, in a lot of these Eastern European countries, which are, of course, now NATO members. So this is utter foolishness to believe that this is somehow going to keep us safe from this danger. It is a real danger. We do need to take it seriously. NATO is not the way to do it. And I believe what's going on in Ukraine can only be understood when it's understood that the globalists that want to consolidate power at the international level understand and have said publicly since at least the 1960s that war and the threat of war is the fastest way to advance a one-world government controlled by the United Nations, which they articulated very clearly in a State Department report, 1962, a world effectively controlled by the United Nations.
Oh, man, there's that could be a solid 2 hours I'd like to pick your brain about, but we won't do it right now. I had you for a few minutes, and we'll hold to it. Hey, everyone, March 19 here in St. Louis, also March 18 down in Cape Girardeau. If you're in one of our southern listening areas, great opportunities to go and see and hear from Alex Newman live, to meet him and talk to him if you haven't ever. Thanks to Liberty Link and John Birch Society for putting those meetings together. Here, it is. You got to get on. Alex, where can people follow you online, follow your work, and where could they keep up with you as you're going around into these couple of meetings here in our area in Missouri?
Thank you so much, Ryan. X is a really easy place, AlexNewman_JOU. My website, libertysentinel.org, and then, of course, thenewamerican.com. But we'll be posting regular updates on X. And thank you again, Ryan, for having me on, and thanks for all that you do.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks, and I hope everyone else will come out as well. All the best, Alex. We appreciate your time.